Hi, this is Design Lota, the podcast about life as Indian designers. I'm Sushi.
And I'm Ange. In this episode, we're talking to Ragini Siruguri about her work as a book designer for Tara Books.
So, Angie, did you get a peek behind the enchanted curtain at Tara?
I did get a glimpse of how the magic is made.
Ooh, let's listen in.
Hi, Ragini. Welcome. We're so excited to talk to you about your journey. I'm sure it will be so inspiring and also very useful for those who are beginning to understand visual communication or even students who are pursuing it.
Well, thanks for having me, Angeline. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
So let's start from the beginning and talk about your creative journey so far.
So I grew up actually surrounded by books and art. As a child, I used to read a lot. My parents and grandparents used to always gift me a book for my birthday every year. And I was constantly doing something or the other with pens and paper and this and that. And actually, the funny thing is, for the longest time, I wanted to open a stationery shop when I grew up and
Interesting.
stock all these things. And I think now I just hoard all that stationery myself anyway.
Yeah.
So, and also the other thing was that both my parents are editors and they work closely with information design and books. So while growing up, there would always be conversations about these things like design, printing, bookmaking, CMYK, and offset, and so I grew up listening to all these terms and yeah, and then sometimes on the way back from school, my mother would pick me up and she'd say, "Hey, let's just stop by at the printer and pick up some proofs." And so I kind of grew up hearing all these things, and I was introduced to software, Photoshop, InDesign at a very young age. So I think most of what I am today I owe to my parents in a way, and my whole family is kind of creative, so I think it's also in the genes.
So how did you take that interest forward in terms of your education and career that you chose specifically?
So choosing to study graphic design actually happened via a process of elimination, if I think about it now. So by the time I had started to seriously think about what I wanted to study, I always knew it was going to be in the creative space. So in school, I never really took to the sciences. I preferred economics. I enjoyed economics. And when I finished 12th, I was also looking at journalism or media and communication. But then what happened was quite interesting because so when I was 9 years old, I started learning Hindustani classical music, vocal music in Hyderabad, where I'm from. So I learned for almost 10 years, and at that point, I was fully immersed in it. So much so that I began to seriously think about taking up music as a profession. And a lot of people told me that Pune was a good place to learn classical music, that I would find a lot of very good teachers. So I applied, I found and applied to this very intensive but really exciting course in music at a university there. But at the same time, I also there was also the an interest in studying design, so I applied to a couple of communication design courses. So there was one at NID, there was one at Shrishti, and one at Symbiosis, which was again in Pune. So when it came to finally choosing between all these options, I felt it was more practical to take up design as a profession. But I wanted to continue learning music on the side, so then I chose Symbiosis. I got into Symbi and Shrishti. I didn't get into NID. So then I chose Pune, and I think now when I look back, I think it's a really good decision. So, and though at the end of it, I couldn't make as much time for music as I wanted to, but Pune, I think I met some of the best people there. I mean, I found my tribe, if I can call them that. So it was a really good experience.
Do you still practice your music now?
I took a long break I think for the past 5-6 years. I just completely, I was so into working, taking up freelance projects as a designer that there was no motivation to get back to music. But I think in the past 6 months, yeah, I have started singing again, and actually I'm trying to do projects that are like combining visual communication and music somehow. So that's again an area that I find very fascinating.
That's interesting. I was just going to ask you, like, how does your music affect your work as a designer? And probably you're looking at projects that try to combine both of your interests in
Yeah,
some way,
I
right?
in fact, while I was in college, I started doing this project with there is a
Sure,
design
sure.
studio called Follow that was initially based in Ahmedabad, but the guy who started it, who's a very good friend, Aditya Dipankar, he's now kind of traveling everywhere. So with him, I worked on a project which was to make infographics that simplify the concepts of classical music.
Okay,
So this
okay.
is a project I started working
Interesting.
on but never really finished.
Okay, okay.
Um,
That sounds really
well, Aditya had also worked on this project called Ragya, which is an
okay.
online radio.
Mm-hmm.
So in classical music, at least in Hindustani classical music, there is a concept of ragas based on the time of day. So
Hmm.
certain ragas have to be sung at certain times of day. So what
I see.
this radio does is to when you go to the website ragya.com,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
automatically plays a raga based on what time of the day you are on the website.
Okay,
So
okay.
while he conceptualized and set up this project, I worked on the logo for the project.
Okay,
So
okay.
it was something quite exciting.
So currently you work with Tara Books,
Yes.
and being in Chennai, I've been to the lovely Tara Books office. It's so inspiring. I really wanted to know what's it like working there.
Hmm.
You even said earlier that you grew up reading some of their books, and now to end up working
Yeah.
there must be amazing. So,
Yeah.
tell us more about that.
Yeah, so just to tell you a bit about Tara itself. So Tara Books is an independent publishing house, and we are a collective of artists, writers, and designers, and based out of Chennai. And
Yeah.
Tara publishes mainly books based on the visual arts for both children and adults. And Tara works very closely with indigenous art and storytelling traditions in India, and
Mhm.
they've been around for 25 years now, and they've
Yeah.
specialized in creating screen printed books. So they've also set up a screen printing workshop again in Chennai, where everything is done by hand, including binding. Yeah, so design plays a very central role in bookmaking at Tara, and also exploring the form of the book, trying to break out of the regular forms and trying something new. So this is something that Tara has come to be known for, and
Yeah.
Tara is
Yeah.
essentially as much a design and print studio as it is a publishing house.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
Tara Books has design and art residencies, and that's actually how I came to work here. One of my
Okay.
close
Okay.
friends saw their post, like there was a call for designers on Facebook, and
Mhm.
she sent it to me, and I will be grateful to her forever for this.
Wow. That's amazing.
So I was 6 months out of college actually, and I was freelancing in Hyderabad. And
Okay.
my mom used to buy us Tara's books when we were growing up, so I knew their books as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only during my last year at design school that I had begun to appreciate their books from a design point of view. So when I got
Hmm.
this, when I saw this call, I said, okay, why not? I have nothing to lose really. So let's just take this 6 month detour to Chennai. It will be a fun
Yeah.
stint.
Okay.
6 months is a minimum time you need to kind of understand the workings of a publishing house, to be able to learn
Right.
anything from what they do, and vice versa. But the
Hmm.
funny thing is, those 6 months kept multiplying because I've been here for 3 years now.
So your residency it never got
It
over.
never got over. It's still going on.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and also there was another really funny thing that happened, and this kind of when I got here in 2016, one of the first projects I was given was the redesign of an old book, and this
Okay.
book was called Puppets Unlimited. Puppets
Okay.
Unlimited was an activity book for children about how to make puppets out of ordinary materials that you find around the house.
Okay. Okay.
And this was published in 1998. So I was something like 5 years old at that time. And yeah, and a couple of years later, I bought this book when I was, I think, say 11 or something. I bought this book for my mom, not for myself. And I
Oh,
gifted it
okay.
to her. And then 15 years later, when I joined Tara, they gave me this book to redesign.
Wow.
It's crazy. I feel like there's some higher force operating here.
What a flashback.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, it's a very, very inspiring place to work at, and it's a privilege to be part of the team. like everyone here is just so experienced, and sometimes it feels unreal that I work here.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe those early months when you started working and how you
Mm.
started picking up stuff and what was the experience
Mm-hmm.
like?
I think one thing that you really notice about Tara's books is how much attention they pay to design, and as a designer, you feel really valued when you're working on a certain book. So the whole bookmaking process here is really collaborative, and it's very design centric. So the designer is involved from a very conceptual stage. My colleagues and I were involved in conversations about a certain book from way in the beginning. It's not like the author writes a piece of text and then there are illustrations and then it comes to the designer. So this linear process never really happens.
Hmm.
And it's
Interesting.
interesting to see how many all the design decisions that you make, how they influence how a book is formed or the final product, how it appears to be, just by involving the designer at a much earlier stage.
You mentioned earlier about using Indian art in some way, right?
Yeah.
What kind of research do you have to do, even as a designer, in terms of trying to understand some of the elements that you could use
Yeah.
in the book itself?
I think what is, for me, what was very exciting is to discover the diversity in all these traditional forms of art, these art traditions rather, in
Right.
India. And so when you think about it, there are so many existing storytelling traditions
Yeah.
that inherently have graphic design as part of their art. So if you take the Patuas of West Bengal, they paint these really long scrolls that they move
Mhm.
from village to village and perform these scrolls. So they naturally have this knowledge of breaking up stories into panels, which they slowly um, kind of open up and tell and perform, you
Interesting.
know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to learn from them just by observing how they make what they make. So
Mm.
that's quite fascinating, and it's not that being a designer and having studied this very fancy degree, and I mean with a fancy degree, it's not that you are above them or anything. You get to learn equally from what they have to offer.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you go about research, and does it involve traveling to places where you can find interesting Indian art?
So the thing is, these projects usually take much longer than you think they will. So I think it was in 2018 that we did a trip to Raipur in Chhattisgarh,
Okay.
and there was a workshop that we organized with some of the indigenous artists there. So we
Okay.
explored
Okay.
all these different art forms. So again, this was more of a field trip, as you said.
Mm.
But the
Mm.
thing is, it's very difficult to kind of grasp an idea and then push it towards becoming a book. And I
Right.
think
Right.
this is what,
Yeah.
so our founder, Tara's founder, Geeta Wolf, I think we really saw her do this while we were there. And it's amazing how she can see an idea for a book in any ordinary activity or in any performance of some kind. So that experience was really interesting, and I'm currently working on a couple of projects that do involve field trips, but these are still yet to happen. So it might
Mm.
take, I don't know, a year or more. It's hard to say.
And it's also interesting how you would select, like you said, right?
Yeah.
What kind of visual elements and what kind of form of the book itself
Yeah.
would support a kind of story that you want to tell.
Exactly. So there are some art forms that um, say they have a very textural quality to them. So then naturally you would lean towards maybe screen printing that, making a screen printed handmade book where you can actually touch the art and where the
Mm.
textures really come out. But on the other
Okay.
hand, maybe when you're working on a project, the story takes a higher role. Maybe it's more fascinating. This is when the illustrations they go into the background a bit.
Mm. Mm.
As a designer, you're kind of in control of how you create meaning between these two things.
Right.
In any book, there's always like the author, the illustrator, the designer, and finally the printer. So I think in each book that Tara does, one or two of them might take a higher, more important role. So it
Yeah.
always keeps changing. It's never a linear equation.
Okay. Okay. So, tell us about maybe one or two of your favorite book projects that you worked on at Tara and
Yeah.
what you enjoyed about designing for that story.
Sure. So, my current favorite project is a project that I finished today.
Okay,
So
wow.
it's actually going to press tomorrow morning. So I'm
Okay.
quite nervous about it.
Okay.
So this is a
Okay.
book called Origins of Art. So
Mm-hmm.
the book is about a village in Madhya Pradesh called Patangad, and this is where
Okay.
the Gond art tradition is said to have been born. So
Okay.
the
Okay.
book brings together two perspectives. So one is of a well-known Gond artist called Bhajju Sham. Tara has
Okay.
worked with him on a lot of books. And
Hmm.
the other narrative is of a Japanese photographer. So his name
Hmm.
is Kodai Matsuoka. And he had visited Patangad and he ended up with this really huge collection of fantastic photos of the village. So he
Okay.
documented
Okay.
the art, he documented farming, he documented festivals, the animals
Hmm.
of the village, the people of the village. So the book is essentially a dialogue between this artist and this photographer. So
Yeah. Yeah.
when I started designing this book, I think about maybe 2 3 months ago. And while reading the text and while looking at his photographs, I realized that it's very necessary to also intersperse these photos with actual illustrations of by Gond artists. And
Hmm.
when I looked at the
Hmm.
books that Tara has already published, it was quite serendipitous to see that the artwork that we already had in our books was very similar to photographs that Kodai had taken. So it
Hmm.
was
Okay.
yeah. So the similarities were mind blowing. Like so
Hmm.
you kind of could see where these artists were getting their inspiration from.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
really enjoyed putting this book together because every day I would discover these coincidences. And
Hmm.
as a designer, so what I had to do was to create some kind of a meaning between a photograph, the illustration, and then whatever anecdote there was on the page.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
every page felt like creating a new story, and I
Hmm.
think so far this has been my the book that I have enjoyed the most at
Okay.
Tara.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds really exciting.
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
there was one more book that I really liked doing, but this was before Tara. This was my pre-Tara days. Um,
Hmm.
this is a collection of street photographs of
Yeah.
Hyderabad. The book was actually conceptualized by my mother, Sadhana Ramchandar, and the photographs were by a photographer in Hyderabad called Lakshmi Prabhala. And
Okay.
funnily, she's the one who sent me the Tara Books call.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah. So my mom had conceptualized this book, and we decided to call it Hide and Seek, but there is a pun on the word hide. So it's HYD as in
Hmm.
Hyderabad.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
this was originally the name of the photographer's blog. And
Okay.
this was a photo book. It had all these wonderful street photographs. And then when we were designing the cover, we noticed that a lot of photo books just had like one photograph on the cover, and it was usually the most iconic monument of the city, or it would be something very stereotypical, or
Hmm.
it would be a
Right.
very typical image of something that the city is well known for. So we
Hmm.
wanted to be
Right.
a bit different. So there was this really nice photo that Lakshmi had taken from the top of Charminar of the view from up
Hmm.
there. So what we did
Okay.
was
Okay.
to take we put that photograph on the first page of the book, and
Hmm.
for the cover we took one of the jali patterns of Charminar and kind of laser cut it onto the cover. So
Hmm. Okay.
when you look
Okay.
at the book first, kind of you see this jali, and through the jali you see the view from the
The
Charminar.
city.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Okay. Okay.
on a practical note, it was an expensive option. So I mean, um, but then at the same time, it captured the essence of Hyderabad without being too
Hmm.
obvious about it. So
Hmm.
now we are really glad we did this because the cover has received a lot of appreciation. So
Hmm.
I think this has been one of my favorite covers also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds really cool. Um, so when you're designing a book,
Yeah.
there's a couple of things, right? Actually, there's lots of things.
Yeah.
So you know how each page you have to look at it, especially if you're going to use all these elements. You have photography, maybe you have illustration,
Yeah.
you have your type. You know how you form that composition,
Hmm.
as well as so when you're, for example, if you're working on a poster. you're kind of really focused on one particular message and how you're going to lay it out.
Right.
But when you're working on a book, you need that continuity
Mm-hmm.
as well as each page, how the message of that page is coming
Right,
out
right.
as well,
Yeah.
right? So how do you go about that? Without like, if you look at other books, like even a novel or something, right, it's really all about the type. And but if you look at Tara's
Yeah.
books, whether it's for adults or children, it's really all about how visually the story is
Yeah,
told
yeah.
using all these elements. So how do you go about that? If you can
Hmm.
talk to us about like composition or choice, maybe.
Right.
uh,
I think
yeah.
it's a bit hard to explain without having a visual
Yeah.
reference. But at the same time, I think
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of the time there are many things that are kind of directing the way this design happens. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's the art itself, or it's the nature of the art that you're working with, that kind of maybe it can give you certain constraints which drive the design. Or if the
Hmm.
text calls for attention, or if you feel like the text needs more focus, so
Hmm.
that kind
Hmm.
of. But then when you see the artwork and when you read the text, there is some sort of
Hmm.
visual language that you have to establish, that you have to keep in mind while you design the rest of the book.
Right.
So
Right.
I think, yeah, I think it depends on the context, it depends on the content of the book, and for
Hmm.
who it is for, definitely.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
you can't use, if you use like a 11 point type for a
Hmm.
children's book, no child is ever
Hmm.
going to pick it up and read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I think it's just, there's no formula ever. It just keeps changing with
Hmm.
context. Yeah.
So that's what it takes to envision and execute to get that delicious quality to a book. Yes, the way all the elements and people come together to create that reading experience is truly magical. I'd love to know more about how stories and visual culture come together in book design. Well, you'll have to listen to the rest of our conversation with Ragini. Coming up in part 2. Stay
Stay
tuned.
tuned.
Tweet to us at Design Lota or DM us on Instagram.
You can find the transcript and references for this episode on our blog, designlota.com.
Keep listening for more stories from Indian designers.
Until next time, bye.
Bye.